This topic is called Equity and Access in Urban Design. The topic examines equity in urban design. It starts with setting out the learning objectives of the topic. It continues with clarifying the key concept of equity. Then, it will explain how equity is related to and how it is addressed in urban design. This explanation will be done under 4 headings, which are public spaces, accessibility, urban green spaces, and environmental justice and participation in design process. Next, the issue of measuring equity will be explained. The topic will conclude with key takeaways from the topic. The learning objectives of this topic are to define equity and explain its various dimensions, explain equity in the context of urban design, understand how urban design addresses equity, identify urban design strategies for creating equitable environments. Through the course of time, equity, equality, and justice have had varying definitions. Equity has initially been defined as fair distribution of resources, opportunities, and outcomes. It has 2 main dimensions which can be used to underline how equity differs from equality. Horizontal equity is explained as the equal distribution of resources, without considering people's different needs, abilities, or capabilities. This refers to equality. Vertical equity, on the other hand, focuses on fairness and distribution of resources, based on people's needs, which gives it a more justice-oriented focus. This dimension refers to equity. A tripartite framework for social equity is offered in related literature. The 3 pillars of this framework are distributional equity, recognitional equity, and procedural equity. Distributional equity refers to the equitable distribution of goods, services, and opportunities. Recognitional equity highlights the acknowledgement and respect of different groups. Procedural equity is related to the equitable participation in decision-making processes. Equity has emerged as a central concern in contemporary urban design discourse, responding to persistent and intersecting social, economic, spatial, and environmental inequalities embedded in cities. Socioeconomic and spatial disparities within cities are manifested in the uneven distribution of income, poverty, occupation, employment, and education across different neighborhoods and districts. Equity in the built environment implies designing, planning, and managing buildings and public spaces to fairly meet the diverse needs of all people, ensuring access to resources, health, and well-being without burdening certain groups with disproportionate disadvantages. When equity is accepted as a norm, it helps to acknowledge that communities start from different places, and that interventions require those working with them to address systemic inequities that lead to disparities in health, resources, and opportunities, ensuring everyone can participate fully and thrive in their environments. Referring to the tripartite framework mentioned earlier, equity in the built environment can be defined as follows. Distributional equity includes the equitable functionality of the built environment and infrastructure in response to human needs, abilities, and capabilities in the built environment. Recognitional equity encompasses acknowledging different intersecting identities, for example, race, gender, class, and age, within societies, recognizing that these identities are shaped by historical injustices and can affect the vulnerability of humans, their experience and ability to access, occupy, and function in the built environment, and their capacity to participate in decision-making, and promoting respect for different groups. Procedural equity involves equitable participation in decision-making processes. This includes public participation in the development of the policies, efforts to increase ongoing public participation in the governance of the built environment, and solutions to improve the experience of marginalized groups within the built environment. Urban design can be viewed through 2 lenses. As a product, it is about the places and amenities provided to urban users. As a process, it encompasses the life cycle of the built environment, from initial design and development to the ongoing management and daily use of those spaces. So, equity in urban design should be understood related to both the product and the process. Equity must also be understood as intersectional. Individuals experience urban space through overlapping identities related to race, gender, class, disability, age, and migration status. An equity-oriented urban design approach therefore requires sensitivity to differentiated spatial experiences rather than assuming a universal user. How urban design addresses equity can be explained under 5 headings: public spaces accessibility, urban green spaces and environmental justice participation in design process. Public space, urban squares, parks, plazas, streets, water/riverfronts among others, are areas where people come together, socialize and experience the city and city life. They can reflect and also shape the communities they serve. They represent the essence of urban experience, where knowledge exchange, cultural practices, and social interactions occur and can become platforms of recreation and political expression. Thus, they have a significant role in creating more equitable cities. However, public spaces have not always been accessible by and open to all groups. People who are differently abled are often excluded from public spaces due to limitations by special needs and adaptations. People can be excluded from public spaces based on their age, gender, ethnicity, race and socioeconomic status. Public spaces can be made unwelcome for some groups by surveillance, hostile architecture, policing, and privatization. Urban design can either reinforce these exclusions or challenge them through inclusive layouts, visibility, amenities, and recognition of diverse everyday practices. It is important to design public spaces in a way that meets the needs of all users and creates new opportunities for social interaction. Moreover, the distribution of urban amenities significantly impacts the quality of life in both advantaged and disadvantaged communities. Therefore, it can be argued that the well-being of communities is affected by the equitable distribution of public spaces within urban areas. Accessibility can be defined as the ability to reach social, recreational, and employment destinations from one's home using pedestrian and transport networks. The term accessibility in urban design can be addressed at 2 levels. At the macro level, it deals with a broader understanding of access related to the structural issues of planning and urban development. These issues include how the configuration of transport corridors and the spatial distribution of people and activities affect people's ability to access opportunities. Micro-accessibility generally refers to issues of access to services and activities at the micro scale, i.e., how the planning of public and private spaces and the design of vehicles and buildings, for example, affect the ability of individuals to access places, services, products, etc. It includes universal design standards and regulations, as well as construction and planning practices aimed at the inclusion of people with different degrees of motor and cognitive challenges. Accessibility becomes a fundamental concept in the equity implications of public policies and in evaluating which social groups and localities benefit from them. The response by policymakers, urban planners and designers to equity issues in accessibility has been to prioritize implementation of inclusive and accessible strategies at macro and micro levels, addressing the diverse needs of communities and promoting social equity. Some of those strategies at the macro level include the following: taking into consideration how transportation systems serve disadvantaged and underserved groups and address structural injustices, such as racism and sexism. Making the use of public transportation easier and more accessible by minimizing the distance between public transportation stops/stations/interchanges and main public users. Including decisions about transportation hubs/stations/stops which will support pedestrian movement in the design process. Providing and protecting general and individual safety via slowing down vehicle traffic, encouraging to solve pedestrian and vehicle traffic together, and increasing passive surveillance. Creating urban forms that encourage walking and increase the use of public transportation to mitigate environmental problems caused by increased automobile travel and urban sprawl, for example transit-oriented developments, TODs. At the micro level, we can identify two widely discussed concepts related to accessibility and equity in urban design: walkability and universal design. Walkability indicates how well the built environment supports and encourages walking. It focuses on pedestrian safety and convenience, ensuring that diverse locations are easily accessible while providing an engaging visual experience for the traveler. Non-walkable environments are considered inequitable in many ways. They create environments with noise, air pollution, bleak landscapes, roads that are difficult to cross, and road trauma. Also, non-walkable neighborhoods exclude disabled people, children, ethnic minorities, the elderly, poorer populations, and other groups, thus lowering their abilities to participate in social life, education, work, or recreation, and by threatening their health and well-being. Walkability can also be considered as a companion of public transportation. In that context, public transport is considered as a facilitator and enabler of walking while traffic and traffic-related infrastructure potentially discourage it. A walkable urban environment can be defined by 6 key attributes. 1. Connectivity: a dense, well-linked path network that provides direct access to daily destinations. 2. Universal safety and comfort: streets that are easy to navigate and cross for all ages and mobility levels. 3. Vibrancy and aesthetics: attractive spaces featuring greenery, diverse architecture, and a strong visual connection to local street life. 4. Multimodal integration: seamless, hazard-free links between pedestrian paths and public transit, bus, tram, subway, to reduce car reliance. 5. Visual complexity: a rich, explorable path system that offers diverse and engaging sensory experiences over time. 6. Dual-purpose infrastructure that supports both utilitarian needs, work/shopping, and recreational goals, health/pleasure. Universal design is rooted in the idea that spaces, products, and services should be usable by all people, to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. It underlines equity and accessibility across age, ability, and background. The 7 principles of universal design should be taken into account while designing urban spaces. Equitable use. Flexibility in use. Simple and intuitive use. Perceptible information. Tolerance for error. Low physical effort. Size and space for approach and use. Some examples of how these principles can be applied are as follows. Designing the main entrance of a public building or plaza with a seamlessly integrated slope instead of a hidden side ramp. Installing urban furniture, benches, kiosks, ATMs, that accommodates different heights and preferences, such as benches with varying seat heights or armrest configurations. Implementing comprehensive wayfinding systems in transit hubs that use color-coded paths and universal icons rather than complex text-heavy maps. Combining visual signals, lights, audible tones, beeping, and tactile paving, textured ground, at a pedestrian crossing. Designing curb ramps with tactile warning strips to alert distracted pedestrians or those with visual impairments before they enter a vehicular lane. Keeping pedestrian ramps at a gradient of 120 or less so that a person can propel his/her own wheelchair or push a heavy stroller without exhaustion. Ensuring sidewalks are wide enough for 2 wheelchair users to pass each other, or for a full 360-degree turn, approximately 150 centimeters diameter, at bus stops and rest areas. Urban green spaces, UGS, including parks, gardens, and vegetated areas, are not just amenities, they are essential infrastructure for urban livability. They improve physical and mental health, foster social cohesion, and support biodiversity. Despite their importance, the benefits of UGS are often disproportionately distributed. Wealthier neighborhoods tend to have higher biodiversity and better maintained landscapes, while low-income areas suffer from green poverty. This disparity is often a form of structural racism, where marginalized and minority communities are left with fewer, lower quality, or hazardous green spaces, leading to significant health disparities. When planning is inclusive, ecological and health benefits are distributed more equitably across the city. Since 1990s, the paradigm of environmentalism has shifted from protecting nature to protecting people. The definition of the environment broadened to include where we live, work, play, and go to school. As contemporary debates indicate, it is not possible to address environmental protection without dealing with cultural and social environment. Academic research explains that environmental justice is about mapping the distribution of environmental assets and liabilities. Environmental bads or burdens include air pollution, noise, proximity to landfills, and industrial hazards. Environmental goods or benefits include access to clean water, parks, and high-quality green infrastructure. The questions who gets the benefits and who suffers the risks lie at the core of environmental justice. Since its emergence in USA between 1950s–1980s, as a response to environmental racism, the practice of intentionally placing hazardous facilities in communities of color, the concept has evolved into a global utopian goal of balancing stresses and benefits. It combines environmental protection with social justice and sustainable development. The goal is to correct socio-spatial imbalances to prevent long-term health disparities, such as higher asthma rates or lower life expectancy in polluted neighborhoods. The slogan "Right to the City" refers to the right to determine and control all the city and urbanization processes. More recently, it is used to describe the right to the city as the right to change and reinvent the city as people wish. It stands out as an important concept in the context of ensuring participation of the citizens in the planning and design of cities and urban spaces. It is not an individual but a collective right, as reinventing the city will require the exercise of collective power. In the academic context, participatory planning and design is defined as a collaborative methodology that decentralizes power, moving it from the hands of professional experts to the local residents who inhabit the space. By treating the community as local experts, planners can uncover lived experience data that traditional surveys often miss, ensuring that the design of urban green spaces or transit systems reflects the actual socio-cultural needs of the population rather than an idealized blueprint. From a social equity perspective, the participatory process is essential for building social capital and fostering a sense of ownership over public environments. When marginalized groups are actively involved in the design of their neighborhoods, the resulting spaces are more resilient and less prone to gentrification. Participatory design acts as a bridge between the built environment and the democratic rights of the community, transforming the planning process into a tool for social empowerment and long-term stewardship. Although participation is widely promoted as a pathway to equity, there is a danger that many participatory processes remain symbolic. Meaningful co-design requires long-term engagement, recognition of local knowledge, and redistribution of decision-making authority. For urban planners and designers, this implies a shift from expert-driven authorship toward facilitation and collaboration. Measuring the distribution of urban resources is a critical prerequisite for achieving social justice, as what gets measured gets managed. Without robust metrics, systemic inequities remain invisible and are often perpetuated by traditional planning models that favor efficiency over fairness. Measuring equity allows planners to move beyond anecdotal evidence to identify areas where low-income or minority groups are deprived of essential infrastructure like transit or green space. Generally, quantitative tools, this mapping, accessibility indices, equity indicators, are employed to assess inequality. However, increasingly now, measuring equity incorporates mixed methods approaches, combining quantitative spatial data with qualitative user experience surveys. This holistic measurement ensures that urban design is evaluated not just by its geometric distribution, but by its ability to provide equal opportunity for health and well-being across diverse socioeconomic strata. To operationalize these measurements, several academic and professional frameworks have been developed. For instance, the Park Score Index was developed by Trust for Public Land. 15 measures across 5 categories: acreage, investment, amenities, access, and equity, are assigned points to determine a city's park score rating. Another example is Sustainable Urban Mobility Indicators, SUMI, developed by the European Commission. It measures the gap between the mobility of an average citizen and that of a person with disabilities or low income, identifying specific accessibility gaps in the transit network. Key takeaways from this topic are: vertical equity is justice-oriented and focuses on fairness and distribution of resources based on people's needs. Equity in the built environment indicates designing, planning, and managing buildings and public spaces to fairly meet the diverse needs of all people, ensuring access to resources, health, and well-being without burdening certain groups with disproportionate disadvantages. Equity in urban design must be understood related to both the product and the process of creating urban spaces, as urban design deals with them both. Public spaces, accessibility, urban green spaces, and environmental justice and participation in design process are 4 main areas that urban design addresses equity. Public spaces should be distributed evenly throughout the city and be designed in a way that respects and responds to the needs of all types of users, especially historically excluded users based on their age, gender, ethnicity, race, and socioeconomic status. Accessibility, at the macro level, deals with designing transportation systems that serves disadvantaged and underserved groups, and addresses structural injustices, planning public transportation stops/stations/interchanges in close proximity to main public users to support pedestrian movement, providing and protecting general and individual safety, and creating urban forms that encourage walking and promote public transportation to mitigate environmental problems. Accessibility, at the micro level, creating walkable environments in cities, should be supported, and 7 universal design principles should be applied in the design of urban spaces. Urban green spaces should be acknowledged as vital infrastructure for urban livability, public health, urban resilience. As environmental justice demands, they should be proportionately distributed within cities and be made accessible by all members of society so that environmental benefits are equitably enjoyed by all. All users should be able to exercise their right to the city by participating in the decision-making and design processes for their environments. Participation should be genuine and inclusive. Equity, or inequality, in the built environment should be systematically measured using appropriate tools, and the impact of urban design policies on all should be evaluated so that policies can be improved.